Hello and welcome back to the EdTech Podcast, where we explore the ideas, innovations and people shaping the future of learning around the world. I'm your host, Philippa Wraithmell, and today we're diving into one of the biggest debates in modern education, the role of mobile phones and AI in learning. Are they a distraction, a lifeline, a gateway to equity, all of the above, or none? To unpack this, I'm joined by three incredible guests who bring perspectives from across the global education landscape. Stephen Hodges, CEO of Effector Education, is leading groundbreaking work with AI teaching assistants in regions facing a huge teacher shortage. With Adam Hudam, co-founder of Stickum, empowering students globally with hands-on STEAM learning using devices they already have. And Payal Patel, Director of Digital Wellbeing and Community Engagement at Digital Bridge, supporting schools and families to build more healthier, more intentional relationships with technology. Together, we explore what happens when personal devices become powerful learning tools and why fear continues to shape the conversation in developed countries and how emerging markets may actually leapfrog the rest of us into meaningful tech adoption. This rich, honest and hopeful conversation is one that challenges to rethink not just phones, but the future of education itself. Hello and welcome to the EdTech Podcast. I'd love to be able to introduce you to my three guests today, and we'll go and have a little bit of an introduction from them. Stephen, would you like to start us off with who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Stephen Hodges. I am the CEO of Effector Education, which is the world's leading provider of AI teaching assistant technology. And before that, I built Holt International Business School, which is a leading global business school.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Adam, co-founder and executive director of Stickum. Stickum is a social enterprise that is bringing STEAM education to every child across the world, regardless of where they're from or what schools they're attending. And also, I'm a fresh graduate from a university this year.
Fabulous. Which university?
Singapore University of Technology and Design.
Well done. Amazing. Congratulations. And finally, Payal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Payal Patel. I'm the Director of Digital Wellbeing and Community Engagement for Digital Bridge. We work with schools and families across the UAE and globally, helping to empower them with conversations around digital well-being, technology balance, helping them identify what values and boundaries means to them and their own homes and their own ethos around that, because we have society dictating a lot of that, but we actually need to kind of take some ownership and go from within and what's important to us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for all of you being here and listening to everybody and very different backgrounds. It would be quite normal for people to be questioning why you're all together. I think one of the biggest things from myself, my perspective as an educator, is the fact that so many of these things interlink, and they interlink because of technology and those conversations around technology. So I'd really love to come to you, Stephen. AI is a huge hot topic right now. How is that going down with communities and schools and parents around the places that you work?
Well, I should be clear that where Effector is currently focused is in markets that have massive teacher shortages, qualified teacher shortages, right? So in emerging markets, it is common. We specialize at the moment in teaching English. It is quite common that the English teacher in the school cannot actually speak English to the level the government is expecting of students. So the supply of the AI technology in that environment is going down very well from both parents who finally see that their kids are able to learn English, to the teachers themselves who felt that, that they have not been able to meet the expectations placed on them. So, yeah, the technology is going down extremely well, to the point where governments are now asking us to step into other subjects where there's similar teacher shortages, such as STEM, for instance.
That's fantastic. And I guess that is the bigger picture that perhaps we don't always see when we're having those conversations, right? Payal, I know that you're working a lot with parents within schools. Like, how is your viewpoint from that perspective when we're talking to parents? What is their general narrative around artificial intelligence?
They feel very perplexed on how to use it. I think that there's a lot of fear out there just because of the trajectory of how much AI is coming into our lives. But when we do workshops, we also try to simplify it and dilute the topic a little bit because AI has been around for a long time. We've been using it all the time. My favorite reference is, you remember how in the gym, you suddenly have all those jams that are going back to back and it's really getting you in the momentum when you're on that treadmill. That's not just like, the universe speaking to you. That's AI. So it's been around us in the most simplest forms. And I think that it lends to is that there's so much scope for education and support on how to use it with intentionality and how to support our learning rather than, the whole fear of it's going to take away our critical thinking skills. So I think that the internal interpretation is far more dire than the reality. The reality actually can be so great if taught properly.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And I think that kind of comes back to that idea as well of any misconceptions. Really, it is about broadening that horizon. And so if we just briefly come back to you, Stephen, in terms of effector, what was it specifically that made you go down that route? Like how did it come about that you began to work with teachers within areas of the world that did have shortages? I mean, teacher shortages is a huge global issue right now, specifically within those regions.
So I'll try and make a longer story as short as possible. So our parent company is the world's largest private education company. It's called EF, Education First. And it has operated the world's largest language school, both physical and online, for years. The technology that we developed at Effector was to power those schools. And actually, we started getting into governments in Latin America on the recommendation of the biggest companies in Brazil. So the governments were complaining about their inability to teach English. And some of the CEOs that we served in terms of teaching their employees English recommended that the governments turn to us. And so we were actually asked to enter the market rather than us actually deciding strategically to go in originally.
Interesting. And I think that's really, it is really fascinating to kind of be able to understand a little bit more about that, because as someone who works a lot with emerging markets and emerging countries, the biggest part of that really is generally around access to technology. So how are students being able to leverage the AI assistants, the AI tutors? How is that possible?
Well, I think what was amazing to us as we started engaging with the governments is that most governments around the world invested heavily in basic classroom technology during COVID. And so the sort of infrastructure, even in places like Rwanda, they have sort of Starlink into their rural schools and such like that. So that, has actually happened in the last couple of years and is accelerated by the pandemic. Basic infrastructure exists to enable us to introduce AI. Interestingly, though, and sort of bring it back to the topic I know you want to talk about, when I walk into the Brazilian classrooms, a lot of, or Mexico, wherever, a lot of the students choose to use their personal phones rather than the devices that have been bought at great expense by the governments. And that is because they're more reliable. So I'll walk into a Brazilian classroom. Many of the kids will be on their typically Android mobile, smartphone, and it's their personal device. They're very comfortable with it. Actually, they have headphones that work. So for practicing English, with the AI, that's much better than talking to a laptop computer where the microphone's further away and such. It is amazing how pervasive technology has become around the world that's, enabling this.
Absolutely. And I think you're exactly right when you said the conversation that we want to get onto, because technology there like that is vital. We know that technology, when it's personalized to a student, a learner, a child, is better for them. It helps them to learn faster. It helps them to feel more secure, like they've confidence within that technology. And so it's really amazing to hear an empowered community around the use of their digital devices. Whereas I think that's a very different situation when we perhaps come to somewhere, Payal, like you work within, especially the Middle East. What's the conversation difference like within the schools that you've been working with?
in terms of phones. Gosh, they're the forbidden fruit. I think that the newest kind of theme that's going around is the phone bans. Phone bans, sorry, let me retract. That's always been there because they don't want them to be a learning tool. Usually it's iPads or some type of laptop capability. But the actual physical personal phones, there's now been phone pouches to put away your. I think that there's a lot of kickback with that with students. I think schools feel like they're trying to do the best. I think that's all with good intention. The kids are clever, as they should be, and they push boundaries and limits as they do as well. That's just a history repeating itself. We all did it in different facets. So, they have burner phones, they have other phones, they have other access. And I think it's not because they're trying to be tricky. I think it's because it's that whole verbiage. It's the whole dialogue. It's words like ban, restricting, and they just have such a negative context to them. And I can put myself in those shoes too. In Dubai, when you go to a major comedy show, for instance, or something, and you enter the arena, and then they'll give you a really high tech locked, pouch to put your things in. I was like a bit taken aback. Really? When am I going to get that back? What if I have an emergency? So you suddenly feel stripped away from a tool that's always kind of been alongside you. And we've grown to, really depend on these tools. So I think that there's a misconception about the utility of them, and then also just a misconception of trust. We need to give our kids some responsibility, accountability, because they're not going to have pouches for the rest of their lives. They're going to have to learn how to adapt to be with things and then somehow turn it off or move it away.
Absolutely. I feel like, Adam, this feels like a perfect opportunity to bring in a STEAM subject, because what an amazing subject, one, just to teach or to have the knowledge around, but actually you must see a real benefit from the use of technology. What kinds of innovative things are students doing? And tell us a little bit more about Stickham and how that kind of links to the mobile phones and devices.
Yeah, so at Stickham, our mission is to bring quality STEAM education to every child. And right now across the world, there are nearly 1 billion children who are not able to access these things because of two main reasons. The first reason is that current STEAM education infrastructure is either too expensive or too complex for public schools to be using it. And secondly, like Stephen mentioned, there's simply just a massive lack of teachers across the world. Because if you can teach coding and robotics, you probably will not be teaching in a public school. Maybe you'll be teaching in a private school or working for a tech firm instead. So these personal devices comes in really handy because the way we overcome the challenge of not having trained teachers or specialized teachers in the schools is that they would have online materials that are designed by us. So they can rely on our expertise in STEAM education and integrating into their own curriculums that they're supposed to learn in schools. But unfortunately, in developing nations, even the schools, like the public schools or the provincial schools, do not have access to like lots of laptops or lots of iPad tablets or all these learning devices. But instead, phones have become so ubiquitous that almost all the students that are at least 11, 12 years old and above will be carrying around their own phones. So while in developed countries like in Singapore, there'll be phone bans where the phones will be locked up in a locker at the corner of the classroom. In these areas, these actually enable them to have a form of education that they previously could not, because this is a way for us to deliver information to them. This is a way that they can interact with our online platforms to be able to show and create and explain and present about what they have created using the Stickham Kids.
That's amazing. And this is the thing, isn't it? I guess, how do we get away from the conversation of it being screen time to screen purpose when we're talking to parents? How do we stop parents within these more developed countries to some extent to be able to say, the issue isn't education, the issue is maybe some of the narratives that we have around the technology? I mean, I'll go with you, Adam, first, if you wanted to kind of go into that question a little bit. Screen time to screen purpose. What's your thoughts?
So when it comes to phones, the tricky part is, as you mentioned, is there a purpose, and how specific is the purpose, and how is it defined and understood by the students? Because most of the time when we see them, for example, in a typical workshop, if the usage of the phones isn't specifically defined at the start of the class, you're going to see students who are going to be playing games on their phones. You're going to see students who are bored of the lesson and start watching videos on their phones. And that's an example where phones are not being introduced in the right way to a learning environment. However, if we clearly make it make a very clear understanding with the students of how we expect them to be using their phones in the classroom from the very beginning. For example, using the ChatGPT app to be able to communicate and brainstorm certain ideas for their creations that they're going to do with the STICM kids, or to be able to do research on certain topics that we're going to be discussing throughout the lesson. Then the usage of the phones are much more specific, much more directed, and it becomes less of a distraction.
Amazing. And Payal, how do you see that linking into the work that you do? Like, what sorts of conversations around purpose do you have?
So it's so interesting because I think that changing the narrative is really all it takes, that small play off of words to get the same achievement. So just quite simply, screen time sounds super restrictive. Screen purpose sounds super empowering. And as a mother of two teenagers, I'm navigating this terrain on a daily. And when we argue about things like minutes, or we have a debate about things like that, it results in more conflictive conversation. But I think that, again, trying to achieve the same goal, when I can change the language and say, well, what are you trying to achieve online? What is your purpose? What's your intention? Then it gives the child, and my children particularly, a lot more agency. They feel their guard's a little bit lower, and they feel that they're talking with you rather than being talked at. So I think that then they can start also having some autonomy and thinking, what am I learning? Am I creating, or am I just scrolling? And they'll be able to slowly start seeing that differentiation.
Yeah, that's so interesting as well, because if you compare that to perhaps those more emerging markets where education is in such high demand, but perhaps there is lack of skill. Stephen, when you're introducing technology into classrooms where maybe there is more purpose, maybe there is more of a genuine understanding that the phone is a real asset, do you see or do you hear stories that are very similar to what Payal is describing, or do you see it in a very different way?
I think a lot of this is a non-debate in many parts of the world just because they don't have the luxury of having a teacher, right? So a lot of this whole screen time conversation is from a very privileged Western perspective, where there is an assumption that you've got a qualified teacher who's engaged and knows the subject to a much higher level than you're requiring of the students. And that's just not true. I mean, so they are welcoming of the technology because it's the only affordable solution to the problems that they face in their education system. They're caught in a catch-22 at the moment of not being able to produce enough local talent and not being able to afford the Western talent. So what are they meant to do? This is the answer. And I think, what you will see is that AI is going to solve Bloom's two sigma problem, which we've talked about for, 50, 60 years, by giving effectively a cost-effective student to every student on the planet. And I really fear that Western countries are going to miss that opportunity and they're going to be digitally leapfrogged by the non-Western countries, just like they've been done in digital mobile payments and mobile telecom and such like. And, I fear for this debate, and, in Western countries, I fear for my own kids. I have two teenage kids as well. And I worry that, we're going to be potentially left behind by the countries who, adopt this technology, honestly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been working recently with India and Philippines, and the amount of innovation and technology and hands-on learning that is coming because of having that access. And they almost remind me in some respects of like a startup company where everything, like, just try everything, see how we can get there. We just want to make sure that we're at the right pace and, let them make mistakes. We're just going to keep kind of iterating. Whereas actually there is so many different things in place. I mean, if you look at the EU now with all the different elements around the EU AI Act, which of course put in very sensible guardrails to a huge extent. However, does that limit in terms of education, and does it really play upon that divide that we are creating in a negative way? I think that's a big part of this question, isn't it? And I think it's really interesting the way that you're discussing the kind of the westernized society, because I do think they are going to become further behind. I mean, Adam, you've just said, you've just graduated. As a recent graduate, what was your university experience like with technology? I mean, so many of the stories that we hear are about students being overwhelmed, students not knowing how to restrict themselves or balance themselves. And maybe this is a personal perspective, but maybe from others that you've seen, or, is that real? Is that very distorted?
When it comes to smartphones, I think it's a bit challenging, especially for university students, where they finally have a much higher level of independence. The time that they spend on their phones or their computers, because, we are going to need our computers and our phones to do schoolwork as well. So there's a lot more independence that is given to us. And it's really up to us to have the control of ourselves or the self-discipline to say, okay, I shouldn't be watching YouTube videos right now. I shouldn't be doom scrolling right now. I should be doing my work. However, the challenge that comes with smartphones is that it is really a gateway to many, many, many forms of distraction, like your Instagram, your Facebook, or other forms of social media, or like video consuming apps like Netflix and so on. And the challenge has always been, how do you make sure that you have that discipline? But I think if we take a step back and really observe, it's really more about how is it that all these companies are actually allowing themselves to really be used in such a way that is so harmful for some of the students. And this goes all the way down to secondary school students as well. Like in Singapore, currently it's a big topic about, and I think this is also a global issue as well. Self-image issues, especially amongst the female students, are increasing over time. The more they use or the more time they spend on social media, the correlation is very, very obvious. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily distorted, but what we are also observing right now is that, of course, my generation and the generation below us are also digital natives. So we are growing up with at least some of us are able to put up like guardrails or, for example, in iPhones, you have your screen time limitations or the parents' restrictions on what you can do. Or, for example, schools in Singapore are putting up firewalls to different kinds of platforms, such that even if they have access to their phones in school, they will not be able to access certain websites or use certain apps or platforms. Technology has a lot to catch up, but I do think phone with a purpose and with proper guardrails was going to be very, very useful. Like, for example, in my university classes, phones will always be there to help us brainstorm different ideas, to help us structure our meeting notes and so on. So there's definitely a lot of benefits that can come out of smartphones and smart devices if it's used in the right way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think I use multiple devices for almost different things. And sometimes I'll be doing something on my laptop, but then for some reason I'll pick up my phone to search for something, even though I could look on a web browser. But it's one of those habitual things, really, isn't it? Pyle, we were just touching there on screen time and parental controls and things like that. So I wondered if you could maybe give us a little bit of insight into some of the things that you do to help support parents, and maybe some of those really important narratives that are coming out from parents themselves, especially when we're working a lot more with quite a lot or substantial amount of westernized parents.
Absolutely. I think respective to all of us living in kind of a global civilization now, you've got so many different backgrounds of people and so many different types of value add that they can bring to the table in an argument, both positively and negatively, about why phone usage or devices in general should have a place in the home. Because outside of school, I think that's our biggest kind of theme for Digital Bridge, is bridging that gap. Because at home, it's always had a purpose of entertainment for the most part historically. And then as it's brought its way into the school setting, it obviously has a great intentionality, but the lines are getting blurred a bit. And I think that the parents are feeling the angst, because when children are coming home, they're seeing it as, I'm still learning, but then, okay, I might toggle here and there, because obviously, we can all get a bit sidetracked and distracted. So I think the underlying thing is, when parents are looking for more, they're looking for more prescriptive guidelines from schools and from anyone, really. Tell me what to do. And what we try to do in our workshops is actually have a lot of reflective conversation, because there is 1,001 different opinions out there to tell you you're doing everything great or you are failing miserably as families on how to keep balance and harmony with technology. But what are the values important to you at home? If it is to have a face-to-face conversation, as adults, are we emulating that with our children? When our children are coming to us, are we able to put down our phones and have an face-to-face conversation with them? and be able to ask them to role model the same. Because oftentimes, when we look at our data and statistics, children are saying that they're getting the finger pointed at them, that they're online too much, but actually more than double that, the children are saying, actually, my parents are the ones that are actually always online. So are we leveling the playing field? And this is a provocative question I bring up all the time with my parents is, you guys want screen time controls, identification, how much is too much, but really we have to dictate that. And you have to create maybe screen-free zones at home. No gadgets and devices in the bedroom. Let's just go back to the good old school that your room is for a sanctuary for sleep and relaxation and recharge. So those simple moves, although they seem very remedial, they can be so incredibly effective. And this will build so much digital confidence with our children moving forward. Just those simple tweaks. And it's a lot of families are not doing those simple things because sometimes it seems quite hard, especially the older the kids get. There's that little thing called hormones. So then, it becomes a little bit more of a debate, but it's healthy debate. And I think that when we start emulating it, when we show our vulnerabilities, if we say we've had a tough day and look how many emails I have to go through, humble ourselves, let the kids know we're also kind of taxed out, but show them if we're learning something too. I mean, both Adam and Stephen have such tremendous, scopes for what they're doing online. How innovative, how creative. We don't have to demonize tech, but we should also find out how it can support us. And then we also have to have a means to an end. We don't overindulge on our favorite treat in the kitchen, right? You don't stay up for 24 hours a night. We all have to have some downtime. So that includes with the screens as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that balance. And I think that's the perception. I wonder if I throw out to Adam and Stephen, what do you think the biggest misunderstanding about young people and phones is that you wish adults would stop repeating? So when you're kind of looking in the work that you do, and Stephen obviously working with different areas, but actually maybe it's things that you hear around other people talking to you about. What are the biggest things that you wish everyone would just stop saying?
I'll let Adam go first because, I'm over 50, so I'm not sure I'm in the best position to comment.
But you have teenagers. I'm sure you have similar conversations. Go on, Adam.
I mean, I'm sure this must be an experience that Stephen must be facing as well. When I was growing up, a teenager, and back in secondary school, back in high school, I was so rebellious about my parents trying to control my screen time. It's like, it's my device. Why do you want to control it? And it's very hard for us at that stage to be able to notice how this is affecting us. Because, our entire lives are built around our social interactions with our friends. And that much of it happens online as well, like through Instagram, through Twitter, through all these social media platforms. And it was so important to us back then. And it really blinds us from how it really can have consequential effects down the line. But I think I would like to bring the attention towards more of the developing regions and how students in these regions are really being empowered by these phone devices that they have. The fact that it is so affordable to get a smartphone these days, and it's so affordable to be able to access the internet, is really changing the game for education, for the kinds of experiences that these developing regions are now able to have. For example, the school in Uganda that we're engaging, that ranked first in the country in coding after using Stickum, was able to get there because they are conducting activities and lessons in their classrooms with Stickum by using the students or the teachers' phones, even the teachers' phones. And for example, when we were doing a social impact focused workshop series for some of the stateless children that are living on stilt houses in the sea in the shores of Malaysia, they also do not have anything else, but they have phones and they have access to the internet. So it is really these platforms that are able to really connect them with different kinds of materials, different kinds of opportunities that they previously couldn't even dream about. Like not even textbooks could go there because of logistical issues or because of governance issues. But now, these smartphones are changing the game of how education can be conducted for millions and millions of children in these developing regions.
So following on from that, look, I think one of the things missing in the debate is maybe how unengaging education has been forever. I mean, I went to one of the world's top universities and the quality of the lecturing was shocking. I mean, if I look back at my lecture notes, right, in the first 5 minutes, I was lost. And then my note would be, have to read chapter 7. And I spent most of that hour sort of daydreaming because the professor had completely lost me. It was just lecturing to me. And now I've taught a few classes. I understand how difficult it is to teach to the average student. And maybe I was in the bottom half and the professor was going too fast. Or maybe they were just a bad teacher. But I think, and I'm the generation that grew up in the UK with only three television channels. Now you've got kids with unlimited media, and the media's become bite-sized and punchier. So, if my teenage kids ever sit down and watch normal TV with me, they complain about the adverts and what's the point of the adverts. And, and so their attention is even more limited than mine was. And so, I think the stakes for education for this generation have got higher than they were for my generation, and the education stayed the same. And so, we have to react to the fact that people are distracted because the education is uninteresting. And what can we do to make the education more interesting? And sort of banning technology to me is like saying we're going back to the 18th century. And I just don't think that's the answer to any of the problems that we face.
No, absolutely. That was the one thing I was just about to say to you is like, actually, do you think taking the technology away is going to make that even worse? I mean, the amount of ed tech companies that I've seen as well. And one of the things that I quite often say is things like graphics. If you're going to have videos and graphics in them, you've got to think about what they're consuming at home. It has to be such high quality for them to really want to be immersed in that, as well as then to be able to actually teach them something. And that's why I think from my perspective, when I work with schools around ed tech and education and adding technology, and it has to be so purposefully done. And I do wonder whether that has given education technology and then general technology such a bad name. I mean, Adam, when you were talking just then, I put you down as a screen-timed kid. So my children talk about how they're screen-timed kids because they have screen time controls. They've never known life without it. And I actually sat in a technology college not so long ago, and two girls were discussing, and one of them said, "Oh yeah, she's allowed on anything. I'm a screen time kid, so I get restrictions." And the other girl said, "Yeah, but I'm really geeky, so it wouldn't matter anyway. So I never go on anything that I don't want." And I wonder whether there's such a disparity. And look, I wrote it down, Adam, because of the fact that now look at you with this big company working with students all over the world because of devices being in their hands. And I mean, really, if you took a phone out of there, what would happen? Like, how, from your perspective, what would that look like?
I think it would really depend from region to region. So in developed countries where the schools have like external tools or like laptops or shared iPads or tablets or communal computers or like the projectors, it's still going to be okay because there's still one screen at the front, but maybe the level of engagement will decrease because now that means that the students are not able to go at their own pace. Instead, they have to share a screen at the front, which means the teachers need to wait for every single student to finish that activity on that slide before moving on. So, but overall, the impact is not critical in that sense. However, if phones are banned in developing regions where they do not have access to other electronic devices, then they're essentially cut off from the internet, which is a big limiting factor when it comes to conducting education of any kind these days. There's so much resources online, so many videos that can just teach things so well. Like during my time in my university, like what Steven said again, the lecturers, I would just lose interest and I would try to watch videos on my own during the lecture to understand exactly what the lecturer is talking about at the same time. It just doesn't make sense from an external point of view, but that was the only way I felt like I could catch up to what the professor was talking about. And these videos are really, really good. But how would these students in these developing countries be able to access these materials if the phones are banned? So to those regions, the impact would be quite.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we would be dividing equity in such even more than it already is. Stephen, just to come back to the AI tutors, how are you seeing students use them? Because my wonder is, that reliance, that kind of structure. Tell me a little bit more around how those work in terms of maybe specifically the English language.
So, the technology has progressed far beyond sort of chatbots and sort of ChatGPT, right? So, when we talk about an AI teaching assistant or an AI teacher, it is basically embedded in our curriculum, guiding a student through every step, helping explain their mistakes, helping give them personalized feedback as to what they did well, what they could improve. And in the most advanced cases, actually the AI leading a lesson just like a human teacher would. So, this sort of concept of using AI for teaching, which of course is a very valid concern where you can just ask it to give you the answer, that is not the way that we've built our education. And so it is very much deploying the methodology that we use to train the tens of thousands of human teachers that we have within EF. And so we train our AI just like we train the tens of thousands of human teachers that we have within our 500 schools around the world.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the really important thing, isn't it? And it's brilliant to be able to do that because we are building capacity in a world where people don't want to be teachers anymore. I mean, we've spoken about the fact that children are disengaged. Teachers don't feel that they can engage students, but maybe it is just actually that passion or that way of teaching is outdated, or that they don't have the specific passion for it. I know a lot of my friends, and they would probably kill me for saying this, but a lot of them became teachers because of the holidays. And actually, if we are not engaging our students in the classroom and they are looking towards learning online and then looking towards all these different things, I think one of the most important parts of that is that ability to have a tutor who isn't going to just feed you all the answers, which is what they would get if they were just going on to ChatGPT or they were just going on to a Gemini or something. Whereas so actually that ability to ensure that those chatbots and those tutors and those teaching assistants are programmed in the right way. And that kind of feels like the information that we need to be sharing globally is this there is a massive difference between learning with technology and technology just feeding us information and that kind of element of cheating. And I know that, from my perspective and things that I've read, screen time has been debunked. If we are learning online, we are not actually consuming screen time. We're consuming information. We're consuming knowledge. Yes, if we're sat there scrolling, it's very different. And so I think one of the questions that I'd like to kind of come to, I guess, because of disengagement and teacher pressure and things, is this idea of behavior. What are the biggest problems that people say to you are happening with technology in the classroom, and that's why it just has to go? So maybe Payal, I'll come to you. Like, what sorts of things do you hear from people?
Just concentration. I think, again, the time old tale of what both you gentlemen alluded to. Sometimes the lectures can get a little bit heavy, and maybe our attention spans are a little bit more abbreviated now because of the direction we're going. It could be a combination of the two. So obviously the biggest word that comes up is distraction. And even with the firewalls, kids are clever, and I feel like sometimes all the ways that they're getting clever around these things, if we could just sieve it through, these are some amazing capabilities that maybe could evolve into the next big tech company alongside you guys and us. So, there could be some really great qualities hidden like a diamond in the rough. Because I think there is strong stereotype, but I do think it's just, again, a lack of education. When I look at what we try to claim with our families and help them understand about the purposeful understanding and basically taking creativity and online learning and then taking it offline. That is such a key thing. And that involves a lot of hands-on interest also from all parties in the house, everybody involved. Because parenting is not a one-night show, right? It's constant. We need to kind of feed each other and learn from each other still, because oftentimes I hear parents saying, we're dinosaurs. We don't understand. Our kids know everything. They know so many things, but they don't always have the logic behind it yet, because that's just not something that's simulated in their brains quite yet. So they've got the interest, they've got the excitement. But when I look at Stickum and Effecta, you both are taking online learning, some really amazing creative things, and then you're able to take it offline and you're showing that execution, how much it can benefit you. And I think that's what lacks is like models like that are not taught and not to, be a promotional taught, but they're not taught to say, these are what you can do with these tools offline. Here are the statistics that show what an advantage it can be for your child's learning and what they can do with it. Both of my children use ChatGPT often to customize extra type of exams and questions. They're both in an IB program, and they create summatives with specific criterions, and they don't just go for the answer. That, again, that's that stigma that's there, is that we just go there for the answer and then that's it. So there's so many different layers, and my son uses Notebook LM quite a bit, and he makes podcasts on it, and he has interaction with with two virtual people on AI, and he interrupts them and asks us questions. But how great all this is a support and extension of the classroom, because you're going to get muddied. 1 out of 20 students on average in a classroom, everyone's on different learning scales. That's a detriment to the learner than anything else.
And I think that's exactly right, because actually what we get with personalized learning and personal devices is that ability for every single child to have their own learning pathway. But also, Adam, you talk a lot about phones and for me, I see like that phone is going to be in our pocket or wherever they're going to plant it eventually forever, really. We are always going to have access to that. And I think removing something that is such a staple part of people's lives and communications these days is almost like saying to them, school is not the real world. School is a world that you live in until you graduate, and then we'll put you in the real world and you'll have to deal with it. So I guess another question would be also, how do we distinguish between the problems caused by phones and the problems actually that we reveal when we look at the learning, and by looking at the learning that we actually have from phones and their behavior? So how, what are we seeing that are the positives versus those negatives?
Well, if I may start, I think it's a technological arms race when it comes to, especially with the introduction of AI over the past few years, education has transformed, or the way education needs to be delivered has changed dramatically. However, it is those schools with the needs, with the ability, the resources, and the means to actually execute these changes that has been able to adapt to a certain extent. But the majority of the schools out there, especially the public schools that needs to rely on bureaucracy, needs to rely on new government policies to enact certain changes, they are still following the traditional system. And these are the places where the negative impacts of access to smartphones and access to AI, certain tools, are really creating a negative impact. And unfortunately, right now, the positive side of impact, like, for example, being able to put up really effective phone restriction or usage, or like Wi-Fi firewalls or data access firewalls, are still playing a catch-up game against all these other platforms that are just designed to really exploit the need of students to want to just get straight to the answers or to generate out whole essays for them. But in due time, I do see the solutions coming out. But then again, in the implementation into these public schools across all our countries, especially the developing regions, is going to take years, if not decades. So this is something that I think a lot of the governments are also very concerned about. How can they potentially, or should they develop the solution themselves, or should they rely on someone else out there to be able to make the solution for them? And if not, then what can they do about the current usage of phones? Is the immediate solution to just ban it first and then see what solution comes out later? Or should they allow them to use it first and then allow the exploitation to a certain extent, but hopefully will teach the teachers to be able to train the students to learn about how it is producing negative effects? It's a very challenging global issue at this moment as to how schools and education systems are supposed to adapt to this new age of AI and access to smartphones, especially when they are resource constrained.
Yeah. Do you think it actually has just shown a huge lack of iteration and change within education? I know, Stephen, you brought this up earlier of, decades since there's been a reform in the UK of the education system, and now there's been some changes, but are they enough? And really, actually, genuinely, something like phones in different emerging regions can be a game changer, and as we said already, potentially even rocket fuel them past westernized countries. I think, are we increasing equity in areas and decreasing it in others? Are we extending digital divides, but the other way? I don't know. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, well, look, education as an industry has been slow to evolve in large part because most of the stakeholders, including parents, are conservative, right? No one wants their kids to be guinea pigs in this grand experimentation. So, you're kind of like when the new school opens up with the new funky teaching method. No, it's not that the parents rush to put their kids into that school. They'd rather see, well, how do those kids do? Do they get into the best universities, etc. Right? So, no, I understand the dynamics, and it fundamentally, I think, needs to be government led because I'm not sure that, the consumers will get us there. But I think why would the government really focus on this? Well, because of the teacher shortage that is most pronounced in the non-Western countries, but it's true everywhere. Now, it's also true that, and you've said it, that teaching is not a desired profession at the moment. And I think that these technologies won't replace teachers where they exist. None of this is a human teacher replacement, particularly in high schools and such like. But I do think it radically changes the job and makes it more attractive, right? So when you go into our classrooms, the teacher is no longer at the front of the classroom, sort of lecturing or teaching to this mythical average student. Instead, it's a flipped classroom model, and the teacher is spending time where they want to spend time, So typically focusing on the group of students who need their support, and focusing on those guys and providing them with the coaching and motivation they need. And they're sort of freed of this bureaucracy because, moving any industry from the analog world into the digital world allows automation, and much of education is in the analog world. And guess what? You get landed with grading and corrections and the stuff that has you working all weekend, lesson planning, you know, and I totally get why that sucks and why people don't want to go into teaching. But as soon as you're in the digital world, we can automate all of that. We can take all of that away from you. And the job, therefore, becomes much more about focusing on the students and, doing the things that only humans can do, encouraging them, motivating them, inspiring them, bringing the subject to life where you have, with your passion and with equipment in the classroom. And so I think this is transformative technology for both the student and the teacher. And it's, not something that ultimately will be threatening to your friends who are teachers. But it will change what they do for a living, just like AI will change everyone else's jobs. Like, whether you're the CEO of a company or whether you're a journalist, technology changes your job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are in an age where we all need to be aware that upskilling is part of life and just being lifelong learners. So interestingly, what sort of skills and habits, I think, and I'll put this to you, Payal, because to be able to support really good technology use in a school, a lot of the research that's come out obviously is distraction, is things like that are becoming issues within schools. But what are the really great habits or mindsets that we need to have around technology to be able to allow us to go, I understand that technology has a purpose and a place in the classroom and how it has a purpose and place at home. What sorts of things do you think are implicit to that?
I think awareness is a huge one. Just being able to know how, for instance, apps influence kids and their attention, what their interests are, rather than just kind of hopping on the next trend of what everybody else is doing. Having boundaries as well, being able to have that agency to silence things. It's like, for us, it's like going to the library and finding that little nook to just get the job done. So kids don't really use that anymore. So it's about just getting into that mental space and being able to give themselves that thinking time. And then also just understanding, I think, intentionality. Why am I going on? What's my purpose for this? How am I learning with this? And these tools, I think there's a lot of assumption that children know just because they're using it in hybrid at home and in school. But actually, it's still such a blurry line and they're quite definitive. And they, as they should be, because it's still a leisure tool. And it's still wonderful to kind of just sometimes zone out and get inspired, and that's wonderful. But then there's so many things in there that they can uncover when they are giving proper attention. I argue that multitasking is such a myth, and single tasking is so much more something that we don't all do, but it's more effective. So things we talk about in our workshop is like, aside from just the focus mode that are built into our devices, other rules like Pomodoro rule, for instance, where it's the 25 minutes of locked in focus and 5 minutes of a break. And how that translates to our children now, there's gamified versions of that. So they can go on and they can set a 25-minute kind of timer, and they can challenge their friends to that. There's even some ties into sustainability where you can grow a tree in that focus mode and it'll feed into a bigger purpose. So I think giving kids the outlook that this is something bigger than just a conflict and a stereotype, and there's so much more beyond that, and it's a life habit, it's a life skill for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would love to ask you, Adam, as well, like from a perspective of in education with Sticklem, if every child could use their phone really well in education, what would learning look like for Sticklem?
Wow, that's a dream. So, assuming by them being able to use their phones well, it means that they are able to discern what is a good way to use phones and what isn't. And if that was the case, I think education has definitely reached a point where it's achieving its purpose. Because for a child and a teenager to be able to say, okay, this is a way to use my phone in a good way, and this is not a way to use my phone in a good way, and actually implement that into their lives, it means that they have developed a really strong sense of critical thinking because they're able to critically analyze that this is beneficial for me or this isn't beneficial for me. And they have the self-discipline to be able to enact on it. I think a lot of self-discipline amongst teenagers and kids comes from understanding. They need to really understand why they are being told not to do certain things and why they're being told to do certain things. And this is the way I grew up as well. When my parents would take the time to explain to me why I couldn't do certain things, it made sense to me. And I would usually follow through. But if they wouldn't tell me and I wouldn't understand why they were telling me not to do certain things, I would just be like, well, I don't understand you. I want to do it. I'm just going to do it anyway. And that is, I think, the direction that education really needs to go to. And for example, the reason why we are advocating so strongly for implementation of STEAM education across all the regions, and you see it in the World Economic Forum as well, the World Economic Forum's job report shares that in the next decade, the top 5 most required skills are the same skills developed through STEAM education, like critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, because these are not only the skills that differentiates us from AI in the age of AI, but also it gives us the agency to be able to make decisions on our own in an informed, critical manner. And you see this being implemented by governments like Singapore, Hong Kong, Brunei, Indonesia, Vietnam. They are all really forcing down STEAM education and practices and pedagogies into their public schools. But the public schools are unfortunately lost because the teachers did not grow up in a STEAM education environment, nor were they trained enough to be able to conduct STEAM education. But you can see the importance is there, and governments are recognizing it because the skills developed through STEAM education is the skills that is going to allow students to hopefully one day be able to use these smartphones, use these devices, use all these technological tools in an informed and beneficial manner instead of allowing it to exploit them.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. And actually, if we're looking at STEAM education, I was delighted to see that in the UK, they have taken off EBAC, which allows people to take more creative subjects. As a design technology teacher, as kind of my original teaching degree, I was devastated when so many of my students were unable to take a subject that was so interdisciplinary, so creative. And when we look at technology around us, it's not just people who are academically able or maybe who are great at computer science and coding who are creating platforms and apps and programs. They're creative, artistic, designer people who can see around these obstacles and, as you say, be critical thinkers and really problem solving around that. I think I'd love to just sort of ask one final question, really, which is I'd like to go to all of you. What would you say from your perspective to educators who don't want phones in schools? What would be the one thing you would say to them? Stephen, should we start with you?
I would say that they are risking missing the biggest opportunity in education that we've seen in millennia. And I would not want to be on the wrong side of history on that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Paya.
Hey. Maybe that's just because I'm in an IB school and that's what the ethos of their curriculum is. Why? Because usually it's out of fear, and that, famous Jonathan Haidt, we're just living constantly in this protective habitat. But what are we afraid of? And in those areas of concern, how are we addressing them? And are we actually naming it and addressing it and teaching and using it as an opportunity rather than a hindrance? Because we're going to have to use this. It's a communication tool. I mean, my children both have a phone. They tuck it away deep in their bags. They're responsible about it, but it's their communication tool. And when taught with correct etiquette, they'll use it appropriately. But when they are kind of audited to not have it and restrictive, that's when it becomes problematic.
Amazing. Thank you, Adam.
I would say instead of trying to avoid the problem altogether, because I know teachers across the world are overworked. They just have so much on their plates. And it is a very convenient solution to say, okay, this is going to introduce a whole host of problems for me. I'm just going to avoid it. But I really strongly encourage teachers to try solutioning around it and see the potential in how smartphones and smart devices can really change the way your education is being conducted in your classrooms. Yes, there are going to be a lot of challenges that comes with allowing smartphones to be used in your classroom, but instead of avoiding it altogether, there are solutions that people are working very hard to help you. So please do take the time to try to find solutions around the challenges that you'll face when trying to implement smart devices and smartphones into your classrooms.
That's amazing. Thank you. Just to finish off, it would be great to hear a little bit about how people can connect with you online or any other way. How would you best like to share what you do with others if they're interested in connecting? Stephen.
All the information is available on affecta.com, and they can find my contact details in the leadership section.
Fantastic. Thank you. Adam.
All of our information is available on stickem.sg. That is STICKEN.sg. And we are a very visual company. We have a lot of different kids making a lot of amazing stuff with our Stickem kids. So please visit our Instagram page as well. And if you want to reach out to me, feel free to search my name on LinkedIn. You're going to see it pop up in the first result because my name is pretty unique.
Thank you. And Payal.
And follow us on Instagram at Digital Bridge HQ. We're always posting tips and tricks and trying to be very real. As parents, we try to speak the same language. We're all in it together, as well as on LinkedIn through parent company Adruption, as well as through my LinkedIn as well, Payal Patel. I'm always posting actual highlights of workshops and all the creativity that's happening behind the scenes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be part of a conversation around technology and phones, especially, in a very positive way. I couldn't agree more with all of your final comments on why educators should be embracing and not running away from technology and mobile phones. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
What an inspiring discussion, and one that highlights just how complex, nuanced, and opportunity-filled the future of learning really is. If there's one takeaway from today's episodes, it's this. Technology isn't the problem. It's how we choose to design, guide, and use it. Whether it's AI tutors transforming access in underserved regions, personal devices unlocking new layers of creativity, or families learning how to build healthier digital habits together, the potential is extraordinary. But only if we lean in and not away. A huge thank you to Stephen, Adam and Payal for sharing their expertise and lived experiences across 3 very different but deeply connected worlds of education. If you'd like to follow today's guests and find more information about them, you'll find the links in the show notes. And as always, you can connect with me, the podcast community, online for more conversations, insights and upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening to the EdTech Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep imagining what's possible. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, rate, and share the EdTech Podcast wherever you're listening. It really helps us grow and reach more educators and innovators around the world. We'd also love to hear from you, your thoughts, questions, or even your own stories of change in education. You can leave us a voice note on SpeakPipe. The link is in the show notes. And we might even feature your message in an upcoming episode. And of course, you can find all our links and show notes and resources at theedtechpodcast.com.